What's up everyone, welcome back to the channel and to another weekly 3D model. This week we're going to be making a medieval prison wagon. So why a prison wagon, you may ask? Well, there is no specific reason. I've done a lot of tech and metal-like objects lately, so I just wanted to change it up this week, and while searching around online looking for ideas, I saw this really cool image of an old wagon, and I thought it'd be a lot of fun to recreate for this week's model with all those wood pieces. But we're not just doing a plain old wagon, this one's going to be a little bit darker. We're going to go back to the medieval times and make a prison wagon. So I almost didn't even make a video for this week, and that's because I have family visiting from out of town. Now usually I have limited time on making these models as I tend to make them on my weekends, but with family also coming to town, I really wasn't sure if I had the time to get this one done. Now luckily I did, but I definitely had to cut a few corners and simplify a few things, and I'll go over those later on in the video and explain what I would do differently if I were to redo this whole prison wagon. As always, this video will be available in real time along with all the working files, and it will all be available on my Patreon page, and you can find it all in the link in the description below. Also, if you enjoy watching these types of videos and want to see more random weekly 3D models, please consider subscribing to the channel. Alright, so like usual for the beginning, we're just going to focus on blocking out the main shapes and try not to rush into adding small details. Now we definitely could have simplified a lot of these shapes to save even more time. For example, all those sideboards on the side wall, that could have easily just been a plain object, and then we could have added that paneling effect into our materials later in Substance Painter. And this would have also saved a lot of polys in our scene. But the main reason we make these models is for fun, and I honestly just thought it'd be a lot of fun adding those details into our geometry and into the wood boards. So we're going to make this one a little bit higher in polys to try to achieve some of those effects. Now if you have sculpting software available like ZBrush, sculpting in those details like cracks and wood patterns would take this model to a whole other level, and I really think you could achieve some really cool and realistic results. Unfortunately, I don't have the time for that, and my ZBrush skills are honestly lacking since I haven't opened up that software in ages, but if you have more time available and have sculpting software available, I would highly recommend doing it that way. And the results would honestly look really cool, but today we're just going to keep it all in Maya. And there's nothing wrong with having a higher poly mesh, especially if you're just having some still renders, or you're just modeling for fun, or you're even modeling for video production where everything's pre-rendered and you don't need to worry about performance as much. But if it is going into a game engine and it is being rendered real time, that is something you need to worry about. And in most cases, you'll end up using a high and low poly model workflow. So you'll have a higher poly model like this one that you can texture on to create your texture maps and have all that detail. And then you can project that onto your lower poly model that you use in game. Don't worry, there'll be more of that down the road. It's obviously more work and takes more time to create two meshes. In this case, we're just going to create one, but I did want to make a note of that just for anybody else following along. And we'll go over that more later on in the video when we go over the UV mapping. But for now, let's just continue blocking things out and we can slowly build up our wagon. Alright, so here is the Prison Wagon in its finished form. So I went ahead and decided to break this thing up into 3 different groups for the 3 different textures that I have applied. Now this wasn't going into a video game or anything, so I wasn't limited by the amount of textures I can use. It's obviously quite high in polys as well, so if this was going into a game engine, it would need to be reduced, or you can use this as a high poly version for creating your textures. But you would definitely need a lower poly version for in-game, and we'll go over what I would do differently in a second, but first I'll go over exactly how I split this thing up. So the very first group and texture is all the sideboards. So basically all the walls and the front bench. So if I isolate this, you'll see how I group this thing together. Now it's majority of the large objects in the scene, minus the roof and the wheels. But one thing I wanted to make sure I did was rotate all my UV shells in the same direction. Now, obviously they're not all in the same direction, but the ones here on the top, for example, which is this whole sidewall, they all are aligned vertically. And the reason I did that was just to make my life a little bit easier in Substance Painter. When I add that wood material and it's going to add all those grain effects and all the cracks into the wood, I want them all running horizontally here on these boards. I don't want them running vertically. Now, if I had these shells all in different rotations, it would make that very challenging. I would have to add so many different materials just to assign them to each object. So if you rotate them all in the same direction, it's just going to make my life a lot easier later on when we jump into Substance Painter. Now I did that as well for all these front boards. As you can see, they are all in the same direction as well. And these front ones are actually overlapping with the ones in the back as well, just to save UV space. I knew you wouldn't see the front and the back shells in the same view, so we can get away with faking a lot of that and just repeating a lot of the same patterns, because like I said, you won't see them repeating because the front and the back are so far from each other. Now for the second group and texture is basically all the small objects in my scene. So the back cage thing, as well as the steps, the chains, the ropes, the lights, and all of that. Now, as you can see, I could have taken better advantage of the space. There's lots of empty space in my UV map, and I like to really enlarge my shells to take up all that space. You're just going to add more resolution to those materials, so there's really no point in wasting a lot of this empty space. So if I could go back and refine it, I would just rearrange these shells to maybe be a little bit larger so I can fill in a lot of that space. Or I could just, if this was going into a video game and I was limited by my textures, I could combine some of these. So the second group and third group could most likely be combined into one, since a lot of these objects are quite small in the scene. And the third group and texture is everything else. So the roof, the wheels, the door, and the remaining small metal objects. Now, once again, I made sure to change the rotation of all of these front or roof panel pieces, just so the wood grains are all going in the same direction. It'd make assigning these materials a lot easier for myself, as well as these front board pieces. And these wheels are just overlapping each other. I didn't bother separating them. I don't think we're gonna try to avoid having any repeating patterns on them, so it's not quite obvious that they're actually the same wheel sharing the same UV space. So that's how I basically grouped together my Prison Wagon for Substance Painter. Now there are a few, or quite a lot of things you could do differently if you were trying to cut back on your polys. And a big one is the panels. So if you watch the whole modeling process, I originally started by adding a plane for the door because I was going to add a lot of that paneling effect in Substance Painter. So what I could do is actually cut back quite a lot. You could actually remove a lot of those polys, and I could have this door object, instead of basically all of these panels, which is, you know, they add up quite a lot with all of the little nicks and cracks that I added, as well as the beveled edges. You could just fake that with something like this. Remove those objects out of the scene and just add a door And like I said, there's some really cool paneling, wood paneling effects or materials that come with Substance Painter, or even more that are available on their website, which I actually ended up downloading one for the specific model. And you can just fake that detail. And we could have done that as well for all the sideboards. So all these ones that are running, you know, horizontally, I obviously just quickly added some edge loops. And as you can see, this is, I'm not gonna lie, this is actually pretty ridiculous. I added a lot of edge loops and then I smoothed it. So it's running vertically all these unnecessary polys in the middle. And I did go ahead and cut some out to save a little bit of room, but still, like, let's be real, this I don't need these extra lines, and I could have easily removed those to cut back on a lot of polys. So I could have done that for everything. All the roof pieces, I was just a little bit lazy this week. You know, with family coming, I didn't have time to refine the model, and there's tons you could do to refine it. So I just wanted to emphasize that, as well as a lot of the objects, like, for example, these middle faces underneath. So everything running from basically here to here, all of these faces, you're never going to see them. You just need a little bit sticking out on this side. So maybe I could move this edge back like I did to these boards, but there's a lot of unnecessary space. So all of these shells basically sitting in the middle here, that's a lot of room in my UV map that I could have just cut out from the scene to not only save on polys, but save on UV space as well. So I could have deleted a lot of unnecessary faces. As you can see on the inside, I was doing that originally on some of these boards. So these ones I cut out, like I was saying, but I just didn't have time, so I didn't do it for the rest of them. But there's always a lot you can do. Same with these rope pieces. I did it with sweet mesh, so I increased the density of this rope quite high, but you can reduce that the poly count on this quite significantly and save on a lot of polys. Same with these chains. As you can see, they're pretty dense, and it's unnecessary. Same with these bolts. So this is another big thing for video games. You could fake a lot of these details. Every bolt, once you add all of these up into the scene, it's going to be pretty high, and you could just fake that directly into the material by just painting them onto the mesh instead of actually having it as geometry. Now, one of the biggest things that I would do differently, or if I could go back and add more time or invest more time into the model, is the back here. Now, I didn't even want to mention this because I didn't want people to notice it, but I know people are going to notice it, and it's good just to mention it. If you look at this rope piece that basically pulls this thing up, it's not sitting on anything. In reality, it's actually just sitting, hovering on this wood piece, and it'd probably tip over or fall off, and there's nothing actually supporting it. So I didn't actually build a way. I would probably just take this whole thing and like raise it up a tiny bit and add some like wood pieces that were holding it up somehow. And that's just a small detail that I just ran out of time, so I just simplified it. But technically this wouldn't really work, or I guess it would, but it'd probably unravel really fast or to tip over and fall. So it would need a way to be supported. But that's just one of the details, as well as this axle on the bottom. It's kind of just hovering here. But, you know, it's underneath. We don't need that detail. It wasn't important, but there's a lot of little things you could do to improve the model if you really wanted to spend time doing it. Anyways, that's just a few of the things I would do differently. And now all we have to do is export this Prison Wagon. We can jump over to Substance Painter and we can start our texturing. All right, so now jumping over to Substance Painter, we can go ahead and load in our FBX file from Maya. Now for this specific model, I decided to jump on the Substance Painter materials website, which I will link in the description below. And I just downloaded one of these materials, and it's called Rotten Wood Planks. Now I thought this material would be fitting not only just because it's cool, rotten, kind of old looking wood texture, but it also has this paneling effect. Now I know we added our wood boards as separate objects, but I thought of a cool idea of adding this paneling effect on top of the wood boards to add more kind of black cracks or crevices, more spaces between, so it looked a little bit more broken up and a little bit more beaten up. So I decided to download this for free off of their website, drag it into my Substance file as a base material. It automatically sets it up for you, and then we could just drag that onto our meshes for all of our wood pieces. So that's one of the main materials I decided to go with on this whole wagon. And then for all of the metal pieces, I basically used, it's like an old iron forged or a steel ruined material, some smart materials that already come with Substance Painter. So I just wanted it to look old and beaten up, and basically it's way back in the medieval times, so it's not going to be in perfect shape. Now, like every model we do when it comes to texturing on this channel, I'm not really going to focus on dialing in the perfect texture right off the bat. What I'm going to do is just fill in those empty meshes with some sort of material, and then we can go in afterwards and refine them. I find if you spend too much time at the beginning trying to dial in the perfect texture, once you start adding in all the materials around that object, it can start looking a little bit different and out of place. And I find, at least for myself, once I get all those materials or a lot of them into the scene, I can start visualizing how I think those materials should look, especially once they're beside other objects that are textured, and you can start refining them a lot easier and save a lot of time. At least this works for myself. So that's what I'm gonna do. Let's just start filling in these empty white meshes with materials, and we can slowly texture this medieval wagon. And also, don't forget, this whole video, which includes the full UV mapping process, will all be available in real time on my Patreon page. So if you want to take a look at the video, or you just want to take a look at the working files, it will all be available on there, which you can find in the link in the description below. All right, let's just continue our texturing. Alright, and that is everything. That is the whole 3D modeling and texturing process that I did to create this old medieval prison wagon. I really hope you guys enjoyed this week's video, and if you did, hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to see more random weekly 3D models. And as always, I want to give a really massive thank you to all of my Patrons. You guys are all amazing, and I really can't thank you all enough for your continuous support. And once again, if you want to see this full video in real time, along with the working files and the full UV mapping process, all of it will be available on my Patreon page, which you can find in the link in the description below. Alright, thanks so much for tuning in, and I will catch you guys in the next one.